On a working cattle ranch in Armstrong County, Texas, a man found something tangled in his south fence line at first light on a November morning that he has never been able to explain to anyone's satisfaction, including his own. He did not call the county sheriff. He did not call Texas Parks and Wildlife. He did not call anyone for 3 weeks, and by the time he finally told another human being what he had seen and what he had done, the Dogman had already come to his fence line 4 times. Before we continue, make sure you hit subscribe and let us know where you're watching from. Thanks. The man we're calling Ned is a third-generation rancher. That's not his real name. He was clear about that from the beginning of our conversations. He runs cattle on land that his grandfather filed on in the 1930s, back when the canyon country south of Claude was still being broken by families who thought the Dust Bowl was the worst thing the Panhandle could throw at them. His grandfather was wrong about that, but it took Ned's generation to find out how wrong. Ned is in his late 50s. He has spent his entire life on that land. He reads the caprock breaks the way a sailor reads open water, by color, sound, and the feel of the wind coming off the canyon rim. He knows every arroyo on his property, which fence sections get hit hardest by the winter blows, which cattle will drift south ahead of a norther if you don't push them back before dark. He is not a man who misidentifies animals. He has been looking at animals in that country his whole life. The Armstrong County canyon breaks are a different world from the flat tableland of the Llano Estacado up above. Most people who drive through the Texas Panhandle on Interstate 40 think they understand the landscape. They see the flat, the enormous sky, the grain elevators, the feed yards on the edge of Amarillo. They do not see the canyons because the canyons are not visible from the highway. But 12 miles south of Claude on Highway 207, the earth drops away. The caprock escarpment cuts across the eastern panhandle in a long broken wall where the high plains fall off into the rolling country below. And along that wall, carved over millions of years by the Prairie Dog Town fork of the Red River and its tributaries, is a system of canyons that most people outside of Texas have never heard of. Palo Duro is the famous one, but the canyon country extends well south of the state park into private ranch land along Highway 207 and the county roads that branch off toward the rim. That is where Ned's family has run cattle for close to 90 years. The land is dramatic in a way that takes some time to see. From the flat above the escarpment, you can walk to the edge of a draw and be standing at the top of a 200-foot wall of layered red and orange and cream-colored rock with the bottom of the canyon invisible below you. Cedar and scrub juniper cling to the slopes, cottonwood where there is standing water in the bottom. The canyon provides shelter from the northwest wind that scours the flat country for most of the year, and the wildlife concentrations are significant. Mule deer in the junipers, Oodad sheep on the cliff faces, pronghorn on the flat sections near the rim, golden eagles in the thermals in the fall. Ned's south fence line runs along the edge of one of the deeper side canyons, a tributary drainage that drops off the main caprock and hits the canyon floor about 1.5 miles below. The fence follows the rim rather than dropping into the canyon. It's 3-strand barbed wire, the same wire his grandfather strung in some sections, replaced strand by strand over the decades but following the same line. The cedar posts are set into caliche that will hold a post for 50 years if the wire doesn't pull it. At the southeast corner of that fence, where the rim jogs around a cedar thicket and the canyon wall cuts closer to the surface, there's a section Ned has been repairing every fall for the last 7 years. Something keeps breaking the middle strand. He had assumed it was Aoudad going over the wire, a reasonable explanation he had never had cause to question. On the morning of November 6, 2023, he drove out to check that fence section before first light. He did it every year in early November ahead of the hard freezes because a broken fence line in that corner would let his cattle drift toward the canyon edge. He was in his truck by 5:30, had the headlights on the 2-track that cut south from the ranch house toward the rim. The sky was beginning to gray at the edge, but it was still mostly dark. Temperature was in the upper 20s, the kind of cold that settles into the canyon breaks and holds all morning because the walls cut off the sun until late in the day. He saw the problem before he got out of the truck. His headlights hit the fence line at the southeast corner, and something was wrong with the shape of it. A dark mass was tangled in the wire at a point about 30 yards east of the corner post. He thought Aoudad first. It would not be the first time a sheep had gotten wrapped up in the wire overnight. He pulled the truck forward, got the headlights full on the fence, and got out. What he saw in his headlights was not an Aoudad. Ned has described this moment to us over the course of 3 separate conversations, and each time the description is consistent in its details, because these are not the kinds of details a person invents. The shape in the fence was about the size of a large dog, maybe 100 pounds, dark reddish-brown fur, almost the color of the canyon sandstone in the first light of morning. The fur was dense, not the short coat of a domestic dog, but something heavier. It was tangled in the second and third strands at roughly waist height, the way an animal gets caught when it tries to go through the wire rather than over it. The back legs were on the outside of the fence on the canyon side. The front half was twisted into the wire. Ned stopped walking when he was about 15 feet from it. He said the first thing he noticed was the head. Even tangled and struggling, the head shape was wrong. The muzzle was too long for a coyote and too heavy for a fox. The ears were pointed and standing upright, pressed back against the skull in distress. The head was too large for the body, proportioned more like a dog's head on a slightly too small frame, which is exactly what you would expect from a juvenile that hasn't filled out yet. Then it went still. Ned said that moment when it stopped struggling and just looked at him was the first time he felt something other than the ordinary concern of a rancher dealing with a trapped animal. It looked at him with amber-colored eyes in the truck headlights, and the look was not the mindless panic of a coyote or the flat incomprehension of an Aoudad. It was assessment. It looked at him and it was deciding something. He said it felt like being looked at by something that understood the situation at least as well as he did. He went back to the truck for his wire cutters. He keeps them behind the seat. His fence gloves were on the console. He put the gloves on, walked back to the fence, and went to work on the wire. The animal went still when he started cutting. He said that part still bothers him more than almost anything else about that morning. It held still while he worked the cutters through the second strand. It didn't thrash, didn't bite, just held its position and let him do the work. He cut the second strand at 2 points and bent the wire back to open a gap. The front half of the animal came free. It dropped to the ground on the ranch side of the fence, gathered itself, and stood. Ned stepped back. He said he stepped back instinctively, not because he was afraid, but because the animal was larger than he had been able to tell from the fence tangle, and it was now upright in a way that was not quite how a dog stands. The rear legs had a forward bend in the knee joint that looked different from a canine's typical stance. The front limbs were longer than they should have been. The animal looked at him for a moment, and then it turned and went over the fence. Over it on 2 legs, moving faster than anything he had seen move on 2 legs in that country. It cleared the top strand, dropped to all 4s on the canyon rim side, and ran into the cedar thicket. Ned stood at his fence for a long time. He said it was full light by the time he drove back to the ranch house. Ned said nothing to his wife Rita that day about what he had seen. Not that morning. He told her there had been an Aoudad in the fence and he had cut it free. He went in for coffee and sat at the kitchen table and went through everything he had just seen and looked for the explanation that would make the most sense. He is a methodical man. He has the approach of someone who has spent a lifetime solving practical problems in harsh conditions. and his default mode is to work through the facts until they resolve. He worked through these facts for the better part of an hour, and they did not resolve. What he had seen was a juvenile animal with canine features, dark reddish-brown fur, amber eyes, a head that was too large for its body in the way of a young animal still growing into its proportions, rear legs with a different joint angle than a coyote or a domestic dog, front limbs that were longer than the norm. The animal had understood that he was cutting it free and had cooperated with the process. It had left the fence on 2 legs. No combination of known animals in the Texas Panhandle produces that description. Coyotes max out around 40 pounds, and they don't have the limb proportions or the head size of what Ned saw. Red wolves are functionally extinct in the wild and haven't been documented in that part of Texas since the mid-20th century. The black-footed ferret reintroduction program operates further west, and they are much smaller animals. Javelinas don't match. Mountain lions don't match. Ned had been looking at the wildlife in those canyon breaks his entire life. He knew what he'd seen wasn't any of those things. What it was, he couldn't put a name to yet. That would come later. The south fence line had a new section of 2nd Strand put in before he drove back to the house that morning. The work needed to be done regardless of what had happened in the wire, and doing the work gave him time to think. He cut out the damaged section where the animal had been tangled and spliced in new wire. Where the original break had been, the posts around it and the ground on both sides, he looked carefully at the soil. The canyon side ground was sandy in that section, fine red sand that holds a track. He found tracks. They were canid in overall shape. 4 toes, claws at the front, clear heel pad impression. But the proportions were off. Each track was about 4.5 inches long and 3.5 inches wide, which is on the large end for a coyote and toward the small end for what a full-grown wolf would leave. More important, the gait pattern was wrong. The tracks coming into the fence from the canyon side were offset, the rear feet landing in separate depressions from the front feet, not the direct register track pattern of a canid moving at a normal walk. Whatever had come through that fence was moving in a pattern that suggested it had been walking more upright than a coyote walks. Ned photographed the tracks with his phone before the wind started to work on the sand. He was quiet that evening. Rita noticed, because after 30 years of marriage, she knows the difference between quiet tired and quiet processing, and this was the second one. She asked him over supper if everything was all right. He said he'd had a long morning at the fence. She let it go. She has learned over the years that he'll talk when he's ready and not before. He started a journal that night. Not something he had ever done before. He is not a journaling kind of man. But he pulled a yellow legal pad out of the drawer in his office, sat down at his desk, and wrote out everything he had seen that morning in the order he had seen it. Date, time, temperature, location, the shape in the fence, the eyes, the stillness while he cut the wire, the 2-legged exit over the top strand, the tracks. He wrote 4 pages in his plain workman's handwriting and then put the legal pad in the desk drawer. At the time, he had no sense of what he was building. He thought he was getting it down in case he eventually had an explanation to attach to it. What he was actually building was a record. The next 3 weeks are documented in that legal pad, which now runs to 16 pages. The Dogman came back to the south fence line 7 times in that period. Ned knows this because he started driving out to check the fence line every morning at first light, initially to look for evidence of what he had seen and then to look for what he knew was going to come back. He doesn't explain why he felt that certainty. He just says he knew. He had freed something that belonged to something else, and the something else was going to want to see that he'd done it right. This is the moment in Ned's account that doesn't fit easy explanation. He is not a mystical man. He doesn't use the word spiritual, and he would laugh at anyone who suggested he was intuitive in some supernatural sense. He's a rancher. He fixes what's broken, reads the weather, keeps the cattle healthy, and gets the work done. The feeling he describes, that certainty that the mother was going to come to the fence, is not something he can account for. He just knew. The first time he saw her was on the 8th day after finding the juvenile in the wire. He had driven out at 5:45, parked at the southeast corner, and walked the fence line by flashlight. Nothing at the break. He walked east along the rim toward the next cedar thicket and stopped. She was standing at the canyon edge about 60 yards east of him. The description Ned gave of the mother is the part of his account that stays with you. He was carrying a good flashlight, the kind ranchers use for checking cattle at night, and he had the beam on her for about 12 seconds before she moved back from the rim. She was upright, well over 6 feet by his estimate, and he has good judgment for height. He had been estimating cattle weights and dimensions his whole career. Broad through the chest and shoulders, longer arms than a human would have hanging at her sides. The fur was darker than the juvenile's, a deep reddish brown that was almost black along the back and shoulders. The head was the head of a large canine, wide at the skull and long through the muzzle, with pointed ears standing well above the skull. She was looking at him the whole time. He did not move. He said he stood still from an instinct that the right response was stillness, an instinct he could not explain but trusted. She was at the canyon edge, which gave her a clear drop behind her as an exit. She was looking at him the way a careful being looks at something it's evaluating. After about 12 seconds, she turned and went over the edge of the canyon rim in a movement that he said looked practiced and purposeful rather than panicked, dropping down the wall into the cedar on the upper slope, and was gone. Ned walked back to his truck. He sat there until the sky was fully light. Then he drove to the house, had his coffee, and wrote 4 more pages in the legal pad. He told Rita that night. He waited until supper was done and the dishes were cleared, and they were sitting in the living room the way they do most evenings, her with a book and him with the weather on television with the sound down. He turned the sound off and told her everything from the beginning. The juvenile in the fence. The stillness while he cut the wire. The way it went over the fence on 2 legs. The tracks. The feeling that had brought him out every morning for 8 days. And what he had seen that morning at the canyon edge. Rita listened to all of it without interrupting. She is a practical woman, raised on a farm in Swisher County and married to this ranch for 30 years. She has the same relationship to the land that Ned has. She knows what belongs on it and what does not. When he finished, she asked him 2 questions. She asked if he felt like it was dangerous. He said he didn't. She asked if he thought it would come back. He said he was sure of it. She went to bed and Ned sat in the living room for another hour. He pulled up the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department website on his phone looking for any category that might fit what he'd seen. There is no such category. The state's large predator classifications for that part of Texas include mountain lion, black bear in the Guadalupe Mountains and Davis Mountains further south, coyote, gray wolf, which hasn't had a confirmed wild population in the state for decades, and bobcat. Nothing in the database accounts for what Ned saw in his fence line. He looked up Dogman. He didn't know the word. He typed in descriptions. Upright canine, Texas, large canine bipedal. He found Linda Godfrey's work. He found Steve Cook's story about the legend, the song that was written as an April Fool's Day joke in 1987 and produced hundreds of real reports. He found the documentation of encounters across the Great Lakes, across Appalachia, across the Pacific Northwest. And he found enough reports from Texas and Oklahoma and New Mexico across the Southern Plains corridor that he sat back in his chair and felt something shift in his understanding of what his south fence line had become. If you have spent any time in the canyon country south of Palo Duro or anywhere along the caprock breaks between Claude and Silverton, you know the kind of terrain I am describing. Deep draws, red rock walls, cedar thickets that go on for acres with no undergrowth. Just the juniper trunks and the red sandy soil and the silence. Let us know in the comments if you have ever had anything unusual happen out there in the canyon country, because the reports I have been going through from that stretch of the escarpment go back a good deal further than most people realize. What Ned found in Godfrey's work was a behavioral profile that matched what he had seen. Nocturnal movement, though what he had observed was at dawn. Association with rugged terrain and canyon systems. Territorial behavior that did not escalate to violence against people who respected the boundary. Juveniles that moved in family groups. And the intelligent assessment he had seen in those amber eyes at the fence, the deliberate evaluation before any response, described in report after report from across the country by people who had nothing to do with each other and no reason to coordinate their stories. He was looking at 3 weeks of evidence from a ranch in the Texas Panhandle that fit the same pattern Godfrey had documented from Wisconsin to Virginia. The same physical description, the same territorial intelligence, the same restraint in the face of human presence that wasn't aggressive. He called his neighbor Holt the following week. Holt runs the ranch east of Ned along the same rim country, about 4 miles on the other side of a county road. They have been neighbors for 40 years since Holt's father and Ned's father worked the same fence lines together. Holt is in his mid-60s and has been running that country as long as Ned. Ned did not tell Holt the full story on the phone. He asked Holt to come over for coffee. When Holt came over, Ned showed him the photographs of the juveniles' tracks. Holt looked at them for a long time and did not say anything. Then Ned told him what he had seen. The morning at the fence, the juvenile in the wire, the mother at the canyon rim 8 days later. Holt sat across the kitchen table and was quiet for a stretch. When he spoke, he said something Ned had not expected. His cattle had been refusing to go near the south draw on his property for most of November. Cattle don't refuse ground without a reason. They have a sense for what belongs and what doesn't. An instinct ranchers learn to read because it's more reliable than most instruments. He'd gone down to check for a dead animal and found nothing. But on the way back, he noticed something. 2 cedar posts at the corner of his fence line had deep gouges in the wood at about 4.5 feet off the ground. Long parallel marks, spaced wider than any bobcat would leave and too high for any coyote to reach. The claw marks on Holt's fence posts and the tracks from Ned's south line are the 2 pieces of physical evidence that Ned has held on to. He has the photographs on his phone. The legal pad is in the desk drawer in his office. And the knowledge of what has been using that canyon for purposes no state wildlife database will ever capture is something he carries every day without any institutional framework to put it in. The Armstrong County canyon breaks have been settled for less than 150 years. The Comanche held that country, Palo Duro and the canyon systems that feed into it until Colonel Ranald Mackenzie drove them off the caprock in September of 1874. The Battle of Palo Duro Canyon was not a battle in any conventional sense. It was a rout. Mackenzie brought 4 cavalry columns down into the canyon from the rim and hit the Comanche, Kiowa, and Cheyenne encampments before dawn. The camps were burned, the winter stores were destroyed. And crucially, Mackenzie had his troops shoot over 1,000 Comanche horses on the canyon floor. Without the horses, the people could not survive the southern plains winter. And they knew it. Within months, the bands were on the reservation in Indian territory. The Comanche called themselves Numunu, the people. Their traditional territory, what the Spanish called Comancheria, covered most of the Texas Panhandle and extended through eastern New Mexico, southeastern Colorado, and southwestern Kansas. They had been in that country since the early 18th century. when they separated from the Shoshone and moved onto the southern plains. Before them, the Apache. Before the Apache, peoples whose names we don't have words for anymore. The canyon country that Ned's grandfather filed on in the 1930s had been inhabited by human beings for something in the range of 10,000 years before the first barbed wire was strung across the caprock. In the summer of 1933, a team of 6 anthropologists met with 18 Comanche elders in Lawton, Oklahoma. The result was the largest archive of traditional Comanche cultural information ever assembled by American anthropologists, compiled and annotated by Thomas Cavanaugh. Among the things the elders described were categories of beings the Comanche recognized in the world, beings that were neither fully human nor fully animal, that occupied the boundary territories of the landscape and existed in relationships with human communities that required careful management and respect. The Comanche relationship with canine beings in their oral tradition is documented and complex. The wolf's place in Comanche cosmology was not simply as an animal. Wolves were understood as beings between the human world and the wild world, intelligent and territorial, worthy of a specific respect that acknowledged their prior claim to the land. When the Comanche made camp in the canyon country, they understood themselves to be using space that was also used by other beings, and they managed that coexistence through practices that kept the boundaries clear. You did not disturb what you did not need to disturb. You acknowledged the prior occupation. You took what you needed and respected what belonged to the territory. The ranching families who came into that country after 1874 brought a different relationship to the land. They built fences. They exterminated wolves and bears through the first half of the 20th century. They claimed the ground in a way that denied prior occupation by anyone or anything. The barbed wire Ned's grandfather strung in the 1930s cut across movement corridors that had been in use for far longer than anyone on either side of the wire could have imagined. What Ned's south fence line actually represents in this context is a boundary dispute that has been running for almost 90 years. The fence marks where the ranch ends and the canyon begins. But the canyon was there before the fence, and what uses the canyon has its own understanding of where its territory runs. Ned had not thought about it in these terms until we talked through the context together. He is not a man who reads anthropology. He is not given to frameworks that involve anything beyond what he can see and measure and account for. But when the context of the Comanche relationship with that canyon country was explained to him, the 10,000 years of occupation, the traditional understanding of beings that hold territory in the canyon systems, the careful protocols the Comanche maintained for coexistence with what lived in the deep country. He was quiet for a long time on the phone. Then he said it made sense. He said it made more sense than anything else he'd found. The fence break that had been happening in that corner for 7 years. Not a Udad rams, something that had been testing the fence, pressing against it, trying to move through a corridor that had been cut off by 3 strands of barbed wire strung across what used to be open ground. A juvenile that hadn't learned yet to go over the top. That was what he found in the wire on November 6th. A young animal that hadn't yet developed the skill to clear the fence that the adults could clear. He has not gone to the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. He considered it briefly and dismissed it for a reason that anyone who understands how wildlife management works in Texas will recognize immediately. The state has no classification for what Ned saw. A report to TPWD describing a large upright canine on a ranch in Armstrong County would produce either a bureaucratic non-response, filed under unverified wildlife sighting, passed to a regional biologist who would look at the GPS coordinates and check them against known mountain lion range, find no match and close the file, or it would produce a response Ned doesn't want, which is someone with a truck and a rifle coming onto his property to investigate. Either outcome is worse than silence, The knowledge is better than the paperwork. The legal pad in Ned's desk drawer now runs to over 60 pages. He has been keeping the journal for nearly 2 years. What started as a record of one morning has become something more like a field study, conducted by a man with no scientific training and no institutional backing who simply decided that if something was using his south fence line, he was going to document it. The entries track dates, times, weather conditions, fence condition, and observations. Most entries note nothing unusual, but threaded through them roughly every 3 to 4 weeks on average are entries that describe what he has seen or what the physical evidence suggests was there overnight. He has become, without intending to, one of the most consistent long-term observers of dogman behavior in the Texas Panhandle. What he has learned from that observation, and what makes his account different from the brief encounter reports that most witnesses produce, is a picture of behavior over time. And that picture is what we'll turn to now. The Canyon Country Dogman, as Ned has observed it across 2 years of documentation, does not behave like a predator in the way most people would expect. His cattle are not being taken. There has been no predation on any domestic animal on his property. What he has documented is a pattern of boundary behavior. The south fence line is checked on a regular cycle. The checking leaves evidence, occasional tracks in the sandy arroyo soil below the rim, occasional prints in the soft clay of the cattle tank bank near the southeast corner, and the fence break that continues to happen in the same section every fall. The fence break isn't destruction. The wire is bent and sometimes snapped, but the posts are not pulled. Something is pressing through at that point deliberately, at the same location, as if this crossing has been used for generations, and the fence is an inconvenience to manage rather than a barrier. One entry in the legal pad from late spring of the following year describes something Ned found at the southeast corner post that he has not been able to put out of his mind. The cedar post had been marked. 3 long parallel grooves cut into the wood at chest height, about 4.5 feet off the ground. The cuts were deep, through the bark and into the wood below, spaced in a way that Ned measured at just over 2.5 inches apart. He has seen bobcat and mountain lion claw marks on trees and fence posts in that country. What he found on the corner post was wider than any bobcat and higher than a mountain lion typically marks. He photographed it and measured it and wrote it down. The marks were made at a height that would require whatever made them to be standing close to fully upright. The territorial marking on that fence post at that location at a height that implies upright posture. That is the second most significant piece of evidence in Ned's collection. It places an upright canid at a specific GPS point with a physical impression in wood that doesn't go away with the weather and doesn't depend on anyone's memory. It's there on the post, it's in the photograph, and it corresponds to the place where the fence has been broken every fall for now going on 9 years. Ned drove his truck to the edge of the caprock one afternoon in late March of the year following the initial encounter, and looked out over the canyon from the rim above the southeast corner. He was not looking for anything specific. He had finished checking the fence and had an hour before he needed to be back for the evening feeding. He parked and got out and stood at the edge and looked at the canyon the way he has looked at it his whole life, as a place he knows intimately, but that also, he understands now, belongs to something that knew it before him. He said the canyon looked the same as it had always looked, the red and orange and cream rock in layers, the cedar on the upper slopes, the cottonwood along the water in the bottom. The thermals from the canyon floor lifting a pair of ravens in slow circles over the rim. It was unchanged. It is unchanged. Whatever uses those slopes and that drainage has been using them across a span of time that makes his family's 90 years on the caprock look like a season. He has not tried to approach them again. The morning at the fence was the closest contact, and it was contact on their terms, not his. He freed the juvenile and the juvenile left. The mother came to look at him and then went back over the rim. That exchange, if it was an exchange, established something. He has not tried to add to it. He drives the south fence line every few weeks, documents what he finds, and leaves the canyon alone. That is, he has come to believe, exactly the right response. The behavioral literature on Dogman encounters lives mostly in the collected casework of researchers like Linda Godfrey, rather than in any peer-reviewed journal. That is not a reason to dismiss it. Godfrey spent 30 years gathering reports from across the upper Midwest and documented behavioral patterns that hold with remarkable consistency across geography and across witnesses who have no connection to each other. The pattern she documented in the Great Lakes is the same pattern Ned has been observing in the Texas Panhandle Canyon breaks. Territorial behavior that communicates rather than attacks. Nocturnal movement through established corridors. Deliberate restraint in the face of non-threatening human presence. And intelligence demonstrated through behavior before any observer has a chance to reflect on what the intelligence means. In Godfrey's framework, what Ned experienced at the south fence line on November 6th is consistent with territorial corridor behavior. The Dogman family group, at minimum a juvenile and an adult female with possible indications of a third, is using a movement corridor running from the canyon bottom up through the cedar and scrub to the rim. The southeast corner of Ned's fence sits directly in that corridor. What Godfrey found across the Great Lakes, the Ozarks, and the Appalachian systems is that Dogman territorial corridors correspond to routes. Indigenous peoples documented as travel routes, ceremonial routes, or routes associated with particular kinds of beings in the landscape. The correlation isn't coincidence. It is thousands of years of human observation of what actually uses the land. The canyon system that Ned's south fence borders has been a travel corridor since before the Comanche arrived on the southern plains. Before the Comanche, the Apache held that country. Before the Apache, the Pueblo peoples of the Rio Grande Valley traded with communities on the caprock. Before them, the Folsom culture, whose points have been found in Palo Duro Canyon, and before the Folsom, the Clovis, whose camps are documented throughout the Texas Panhandle. 9,000 years of human habitation around a landscape feature, and the humans knew it as a place where particular kinds of attention were warranted. The Comanche warrior societies are one of the documented cultural records from that landscape that bear directly on what Ned found in his fence. The warrior societies of the Kiowa, who were allied with the Comanche and shared the canyon country, included associations called dog soldiers, the name drawn from visions and dreams of canine beings that were recognized as carrying particular power. The Koitsenko, the 10 greatest warriors of the Kiowa, were known as the real dogs. The warrior society traditions of the Southern Plains tribes wove canine beings into their understanding of power, territory, and the relationship between humans and the wild world in ways that suggest long familiarity with something in that landscape that warranted that kind of attention. This is not proof that what Ned found in his fence is what the Comanche elders described in Lawton in 1933. It is documentation that the people who lived in that country for thousands of years before Ned's grandfather filed his homestead claim had a category for canine beings that operated at the boundary of the human and the wild, that were associated with specific territories, and that required a particular kind of careful management from humans who shared the landscape. That's not folklore. That's 9,000 years of field observation by people who were paying close attention to everything that used the land they lived on. Ned found some of this on his own after our initial conversations, reading through what he could access online about the Comanche ethnographic record. He spent a couple of evenings going through the available sources and called back to talk about what he'd found. The call that stands out was the one where he said, flat, without any embellishment. He said those people knew what lived down there. He said the thing that bothered him was how long his own family had been on that land without knowing. 3 generations of people who understood that canyon better than most and never once considered that the fence breaks in the southeast corner were something other than sheep. That observation points to something important about the institutional blindness around this phenomenon, and it's not about intelligence or observation skills. Ned's family are sharp, attentive, knowledgeable people. The problem is the category. If your mental framework for what can exist in the canyon country of the Texas Panhandle does not include an upright canine of significant size and intelligence, you will not recognize what you're looking at even when the evidence is right in front of you. The fence breaks were evidence. The tracks in the sandy arroyo soil over the years were evidence. The cattle that avoided the south draw when something moved through it were evidence. None of it registered as a pattern because there was no category to put it in. The Comanche had the category. It didn't fit on any TPWD form, but it fit in the oral tradition that those 18 elders sat with 6 anthropologists and described in Lawton in the summer of 1933. By the end of November in the first year, Ned had enough in the legal pad to see the overall shape of what he was dealing with. The Dogman family group used the southeast corridor on a cycle that roughly corresponded to lunar phases. He cannot prove that. The journal doesn't have enough data points. But the entries that showed evidence of movement clustered around the new moon and full moon, when conditions at the canyon rim are either completely dark or bright enough to move by. Ned noted the pattern without making much of it at first. By spring, he was going out on the predicted cycle rather than random schedule and finding something to document more often than not. This is the point in his account where the picture shifts from a single encounter to something larger. Because what the cycle observation implies is not a random animal moving through his land, it's a being with a schedule, a predictable pattern of movement tied to conditions rather than to hunger or prey availability. It's territorial maintenance, the regular patrol of a claimed space, the checking of boundaries, the renewal of markers. The claw marks on the cedar post, the fence break that repeats at the same location, the tracks at the corner of the cattle tank. These are not the signs of an animal moving through unfamiliar ground. They are the signs of an animal that knows exactly where it is and maintains its relationship with the space. That level of organized territorial behavior in a large predator is not unknown in the biological literature. Wolves do it. Mountain lions do it. What makes the Dogman behavior different from known predator territorial maintenance is the upright posture, the ability to reach 7 feet up a fence post and leave a mark at a height that no known predator in the Texas Panhandle can produce, as well as the problem-solving capacity that the juvenile in the fence demonstrated. That animal understood that Ned was cutting it free. It held still in a way that suggests it processed the situation and made a choice. That's not reflex, that's not conditioned behavior, that's a decision made in real time based on an accurate assessment of what was happening and who was doing it. Ned has a photograph on his phone that he has not shared publicly and does not intend to. He took it in April of the year following the initial encounter, on an evening when he was checking the southeast fence line at dusk. He was carrying his phone in his breast pocket and had his work gloves on. He saw something at the canyon edge, 200 yards east along the rim, and his phone was out of his pocket before he was aware of deciding to reach for it. He got one image before whatever was standing at the rim moved back over the edge. He described the photograph to us in detail. It shows the canyon rim at dusk, the sky still pale above the orange-red rock wall, the cedar line dark against the lighter sky. At the rim's edge, at the far left of the frame, is a shape. The shape is upright. The resolution at 200 yards in fading light is not good enough to pick out details given the distance and the failing light. Not a dedicated telephoto lens, and the light was failing. But the shape is clearly on 2 legs. The shoulder and head profile is visible against the sky. The muzzle line, the ears, the width of the shoulders relative to the height. Ned has shown that photograph to two people, his wife Rita and his neighbor Holt. Both of them looked at it for a long time, and neither of them had anything to say that resolved what they were looking at. Holt's response, after studying the image for about a minute, was to hand the phone back to Ned and say he thought Ned should keep that to himself for now. Ned agreed. He has thought about why he's keeping it, in explicit terms of what would happen if it circulated publicly. Highway 207 runs right through the canyon country. The state park draws hundreds of thousands of visitors a year, and the private ranch land south of it is not heavily gated against county road access. If a credible photograph of an upright canine in the Armstrong County breaks went public, the response would not be scientific, it would be recreational. People with trucks and rifles and trail cameras would be on those roads within days and would stay for weeks, producing exactly the kind of confrontation that Ned's 2 years of restrained behavior has so far avoided. He has been given something. He has not decided what to do with it yet, but he is clear that releasing the photograph is not the answer. The encounter with the juvenile lasted maybe 4 minutes from the time Ned got out of his truck to the time the animal went back over the fence. Ned has replayed those 4 minutes many times in the 2 years since, and the detail that keeps returning is not the size or the strangeness of the animal. It's the stillness. The moment when the juvenile stopped struggling and went quiet in the wire and looked at him. He has handled a lot of trapped animals in his life. He knows the panic of an aoudid wrapped in wire, the thrashing and the screaming, the desperation. He knows the flat terror of a coyote in a trap. He knows what trapped animals do when a human approaches. What the juvenile did was different. It assessed the situation, registered that he was not attacking, and chose to hold still and let him work. That choice is the part that will not leave him. The intelligence he observed in those 4 minutes is the same intelligence Godfrey documented across the Great Lakes, and the same intelligence documented by independent witnesses in Oregon and Michigan. Different landscapes, different evidence types, same cognitive signature, an intelligence that processes human behavior in real time, makes assessments, and chooses responses based on those assessments rather than instinct. An intelligence that understands what a fence is, what cutting wire means, and what the correct response to a non-threatening human doing that work is. Ned said in one of our later conversations that the hardest part of processing the experience was not the strangeness of what he saw. It was the familiarity of it. The intelligence in the juvenile's assessment looked like a kind of intelligence he recognized. He could not put a species name to it, but the cognitive process behind the stillness was recognizable. Something reading the intent of the being it was looking at and making a reasoned decision. Whatever the Dogman is, the cognitive process Ned observed in those 4 minutes took him a long time to accept, because accepting it meant accepting something his entire life experience had not prepared him for. He is 58 years old. He has been on that land since he could walk. He knows what belongs there and what doesn't, and what he found in his south fence line does not belong to any category that his grandfather or his father would have recognized. But the canyon itself recognized it. The canyon has been recognizing it for longer than any of the ranch families who have worked the caprock breaks have been alive. The September and October of the second year are the most densely documented section of the legal pad. The weather was dry, which kept the arroyo soil firmer and made track evidence less common, but also kept the visibility at the canyon rim better than in the wet years. Ned went out 12 times in those 2 months. He found evidence on 5 of those 12 trips. 3 entries describe tracks. 1 describes fresh claw marks on the cedar post. The second time that post has been marked in 2 years, the second set of marks at the same height as the first. The 5th entry describes the most sustained visual observation he has had since the initial encounter. He was parked at the southeast corner on a clear evening in early October, about 40 minutes before sunset. The light was coming off the canyon wall at a low angle, the way October light does in the canyon breaks, turning the red rock a deeper red and throwing the cedar into sharp relief. He was not expecting to see anything. He was out of his truck, leaning against the driver's door, watching the canyon rim because the evening was still and he had nowhere to be for half an hour. She came over the rim about 150 yards west of where he was standing. She was on two legs from the moment she cleared the rim. She walked along the canyon edge in the open between the cedar thickets, moving in the direction of the southeast corner, and she was in his view for close to 40 seconds before she turned back and went over the edge. In 40 seconds, in late afternoon light, at 150 yards, Ned was able to see enough to update his understanding of what he was looking at. She was taller than he had estimated in the first encounter. He had thought 6 feet or a little over. In the October light against the cedar and the rock, with the sky as background for part of the walk, he revised that estimate upward significantly. His guess now is closer to 7 feet, which he acknowledges is a guess rather than a measurement. The build he had observed in the first encounter was confirmed, broad through the chest and shoulders, the arms longer than they would be on a human of the same height, the legs carrying a different joint geometry than a human's or a typical quadruped's. The fur was uniformly dark along the back and lighter along the front, reddish-brown through the chest and belly, close to the color of the canyon sandstone in shadow. The walk itself was the thing. He has tried to describe it multiple times and keeps coming back to the word purposeful. She was not moving the way a cautious animal moves. She was not skulking along the rim or keeping low. She was walking on the open ground at the canyon edge with the posture of something that owns what it's walking on, with the ease and assurance of a being that is fully at home in its environment. The walk had authority to it. That is the word Ned used, and he used it twice in describing that 40 seconds of observation. She saw him. He is certain of that. She turned her head in his direction about 20 seconds into the walk, when she was at maybe 100 yards, and the head turned back and the walk continued. She registered him, evaluated him as whatever category she had put him in over 2 years of fence line encounters. Acceptable, known, not a threat, and kept moving along the rim toward her destination. Whatever her destination was, it was past the southeast corner or through it, because she turned before she reached his position and went back over the edge, dropping out of sight below the rim in the same practiced way he had seen the first morning. Ned stood at the fence for a long time after she was gone. He said the canyon was completely quiet, no wind. The last ravens had gone up to wherever they roost for the night. The cattle were on the far side of the property, half a mile north, invisible from the rim. He was alone at the canyon edge in the fading October light, and what he was thinking about was the walk. The authority of it, the ease, the complete absence of any behavior that suggested awareness of him as a threat or an intrusion. He had been reduced in her assessment to a known element of the environment, a feature of the landscape she had cataloged and categorized and filed away. The rancher at the southeast corner who cuts juveniles out of the wire and then leaves. She knew him. She had been observing him for at least as long as he had been observing her, and she had put him in a slot in her understanding of the territory. And the slot was, harmless, present occasionally, does not require a change in behavior. That recognition, the certainty that he was being observed and cataloged with as much care as he was observing and cataloging the canyon, was the thing that changed how Ned thought about the south fence line and what it represented. He was not studying a wild animal from the outside. He was inside someone else's study. He was the data point. The consistency of his behavior over 2 years, the fence checks, the departure without confrontation, the restraint had been noted and assessed and factored into a picture of the territory that was more comprehensive than his own. He has adjusted his behavior accordingly. He does not park at the southeast corner as often as he used to. He drives the fence line and checks it from the truck window rather than getting out and walking. He does not stay long at the south sections after dark. He is not frightened. He is respectful. There is a difference, and he is clear about which one applies. The cattle that Holt runs on his property east of the county road are still avoiding the south draw on Holt's land. This has been consistent across 2 years. Holt has accepted it. He adjusted his grazing rotation to keep the cattle in the north pastures through the fall months, when whatever moves in the canyon draw is most active. He does not know exactly what he's managing around. He has Ned's account and his own claw marks on the fence post. That's enough for a practical man. You move your cattle away from the thing that's bothering them, and you get on with the year. What Holt said to Ned when they talked through the whole picture last spring is something Ned put in the legal pad verbatim. Holt said the funny part was that it wasn't really his fence post to begin with. Holt's grandfather strung that fence in the 40s. Before the fence, before the wire, before the cedar post set in caliche, whatever put those marks on that post at that height was walking that rim freely. The marks are on the post because the post happened to be in the way of a route that predates the post by as long as the canyon predates the caprock. Holt has been running his cattle around a prior claim for a long time, and the claw marks are just the clearest evidence that the prior claim is still being asserted. Ned brought this home through the Comanche context once he had thought about it long enough. His grandfather filed on this land in the 1930s. The Comanche were driven off the caprock in 1874. Before 1874, Numunu. Before them, Apache. Before the Apache, people whose names we no longer have. Every layer of human occupation in those canyon breaks had a relationship with what uses the canyon floor. Some are documented. Some are in the oral record the 18 elders described to the 6 anthropologists in Lawton in 1933. Some predate any record we have access to. The Dogman in the Armstrong County canyon breaks has been there for all of it. The Comanche camp fires on the canyon floor. The Mackenzie raid in the September dawn of 1874. The first cattle drive down the caprock wall. The homestead filing. The fence lines going in through the 20s and 30s. The drought of the 50s and the recovery after that. 3 generations of the same ranch family working the same ground. All of it witnessed from the canyon and the rim by a being that does not appear on any state wildlife database and cannot be reported to any agency through any existing protocol. What Ned is left with is the knowledge, the specific embodied first-hand knowledge of what uses his south fence line and the canyon below it. He is left with 16 pages in a legal pad in a desk drawer and more than 400 photographs on his phone, most of them documenting ordinary fence conditions and the occasional track or mark that suggests where the corridor is being used. He is left with the single photograph from the April dusk, the one he has shown to 2 people and intends to keep to himself for now, and the memory of 40 seconds of a being walking the canyon rim in October light with the unhurried authority of something that has been walking that rim for a very long time. He is also left with the morning at the fence. November 6th. The juvenile tangled in the second and third strand in the first light, the amber eyes in the truck headlights, the stillness when he walked up with the wire cutters, the 4 minutes of work with the animal holding quiet, and then the 2-legged exit over the top strand into the cedar on the canyon side. That morning is the hinge point of everything. If he had driven past and called in an Aoudad report to the neighbor who leases the hunting rights on the east section, if he had not stopped and gotten out of the truck, none of the subsequent observation would exist. He would have filled in the wire and gone home, and the fence break would have kept happening every fall without a name. He stopped. He cut it free. Whatever calculus the mother was running in the weeks after that morning, whether it was recognizing a specific individual in his behavior or whether it was registering only that the ranch had produced a positive outcome for her young one, the result was that she came to the rim and looked at him. She made herself visible. And in doing so, she started the 2-year exchange of observation that has produced the most sustained behavioral record of dogman activity in the Texas Panhandle that any single witness has assembled. The ethical question that Ned has been living with since that first morning is one he does not resolve and does not try to. He knows what is using the canyon. He knows the corridor runs through his south fence line. He knows the wire breaks every fall because a corridor that has been in use for centuries does not stop being used because someone strung barbed wire across it in the 1930s. And he knows that the information he holds, if released in the wrong way, would bring exactly the kind of attention to the Armstrong County canyon breaks that would force a confrontation. He is not willing to be the one who causes that confrontation. So he keeps the legal pad in the desk drawer. He keeps the photograph on his phone. He drives the south fence line every few weeks on the cycle that the 2 years of observation suggest is most likely to produce evidence of movement. He repairs the wire in the southeast corner section when it breaks each fall. And he does the repair carefully, because he understands now that he is not fixing vandalism or storm damage. He is managing a boundary that has competing claims on it, and his job as the most recent layer of human occupation in a landscape with a very deep human history is to manage it in a way that keeps the existing arrangement intact. The arrangement is simple. He does not approach the canyon without cause. He does not set trail cameras in the southeast section, though he has thought about it. He does not try to bait or attract or provoke contact. He does not share the location information with anyone who might use it to find rather than to understand. In return, his cattle are not bothered. His fences sustain 1 break per year in one specific location that he knows is coming and budgets for. And occasionally, at the canyon rim in the right light, he sees something that no wildlife biologist in Texas has a category for. That is the arrangement. It is not a formal one. Nobody negotiated it. Nobody signed anything. It emerged from the interaction that started on the morning of November 6th, 2023. When a man stopped his truck at a fence break in the first light, got out with his wire cutters and made a choice to help rather than to harm. And the thing in the fence held still long enough to let that choice play out. Ned told us at the end of our last conversation that he has started to think about the arrangement in terms of what he owes rather than what he has received. He did not choose to find the juvenile in the fence. He did not choose to be the one who would discover what has been using the southeast corridor. But he made a choice about what to do with what he found. And that choice had consequences that he is now responsible for managing. The canyon is not his to give away. The information is not his to sell. What he holds in trust for an arrangement that predates him by thousands of years. He is not a sentimental man. He would not use that language himself. But the thought behind it is there in the journal, plain as fence wire. That some things are bigger than property lines and some claims are older than any deed recorded in the Armstrong County courthouse. And the correct posture toward both of those facts is not ownership, but respect. The south fence line in the southeast corner still breaks every fall. He expects it will break this fall, too, when the canyon country cools and the movement through the corridor picks up. He will go out and repair it, the way his grandfather repaired fence and his father repaired fence, and the way the ranching families on the caprock have been doing this work since the first wire was strung across this country 150 years ago. But he will check both sides of the fence now before he sets to work, and he will acknowledge without saying anything to anyone that the break is not damage. It is a negotiation. A slow, patient, ongoing discussion across a barbed wire line between the occupation that holds the deed and the occupation that predates the deed by a span of time that makes the deed irrelevant. The canyon holds its own record. The red and orange layers of Triassic and Permian rock at the base of the wall have been sitting there for 250 million years, carved by the prairie dog town fork of the Red River over millions of years of water and wind. The canyon was here before any human being walked the caprock. It will be here after the last barbed wire post rusts out of the caliche. What uses the canyon has been there across most of that span. Ned's family has been there for 90 years. The juvenile in his fence line is grown now or close to it. 2 years is a long time in the life of a large animal. Whatever it has grown into is somewhere in that canyon system tonight, moving along corridors that existed before the first Spanish explorer put eyes on the Palo Duro breaks in 1541. Moving the way things move in country they own completely, with the ease of belonging that no deed can confer and no fence can take away. Ned keeps the legal pad in the desk drawer and the photograph on his phone. He checks the south fence line. He gets the work done, the way ranchers get the work done on the caprock, in the face of whatever the land and the weather and the country decide to put in front of them. He does not know how the arrangement ends. He is not sure it ends. He thinks maybe it is simply what it is, an old country with old claims and a fence line in the southeast corner that is going to need new wire in the middle strand every autumn. For as long as the canyon is there and he is alive to go out and fix it,